So this is the third session of the Brams-Otp Q&A, and we'll have three presentations. We have Kevin Jamey and Adam Robaczewski from Brahms talking about their projects in music perception, and Andrea Sander-Montant from Concordia will be presenting her study on phonetic boundaries and exporting experiments from Open Sesame to JDOS. Yeah, well, with no further ado, Kevin, we'll let you start.
Okay, hello. So I'm Kevin Jamey, working with Brahms with Dr. Simone Dalla Bella. So my project is, in a nutshell, it's an online bilingual music tapping study designed to test a specific type of music stimuli that we're going to use on a rhythm training game, which is programmed for tablets. And the population we're targeting here are children with autism. So the main aim here is to see if the music stimuli that we're going to use for this game is interesting, motivating, and accessible in terms of difficulty for children in general and children with autism. So we initially started doing this sort of piloting of the game interface in person earlier this year on actual tablets, but then we had to hold back on that because of the pandemic, and now we had to adapt this so that it can be done online. So the framework that I chose to do this is with mainly JavaScript, HTML, CSS, and JSPsych. JSPsych, had the plugins that we really just needed for this specific study, which was essentially to give instructions, to record information about participants, ask questions on Likert scales, and present audio stimuli, as well as record responses on the keyboard or by tapping on the screen, for example, or on a button. So we actually had to customize a few plugins for this this study, but it was we found that JSPsych was pretty intuitive in doing that. So for example, the main challenge there was because we have to record tapping of a participant, tapping responses synchronized with the audio. So we would play a musical piece, they would have to tap to the beat of the piece, and we want to record if they're tapping on the time or not. So I think the best thing to do maybe at this point is I can just show you the study because it's ready. We'll go through it a little bit so you can see how it evolves, and then I'll go into more detail about the challenges, and maybe we can have a look at the script as well if we have some time. So I'm going to run this from JDOS, my local JDOS here. Everybody can see?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. So as I mentioned, it's a bilingual study. So here we managed to program this so that you can choose at the beginning what language you want, and then in the script, each time it adapts each section based on the language that you chose at the beginning. So I'm going to choose English here. So then, yeah, the first welcome page. And then it was really important for us to know how the responses would be recorded, since it's a synchronization study. And now that it's online, there's a variety of different types of platforms that people may be using, in contrast to just the in-person tablet on a software, which was fairly easy to record. So here we had to imagine what people be using. So we found that the best question to ask actually was simply, do you have a physical keyboard? Because if they don't have a physical keyboard, then they probably have something that's a touch screen. So either they'd be using a tablet or a desktop or a laptop that has touchscreen on it. So here I'm gonna do it with the mouse basically. So I'm gonna say no so that you can see what I'm doing. But we really preferred physical keyboard because we thought it has maybe more precise recording of responses versus a click of a mouse, which can also generate 2 clicks at once. It's a bit more complicated to record. So here, physical keyboard, no. So we have some instructions. In this experiment, you'll hear some music songs. Make sure you're in a quiet place and you can hear the songs clearly and loudly enough through your headphones. Let's make sure the music is loud enough. Put on your earplugs or headphones. When you're ready, click next and you'll hear some music played on your device. So now we're calibrating the audio. Can you all hear that? So next is like a practice trial. So here we're going to explain what we're doing. So on this task, you'll be asked to tap the button on the screen while the music is playing. You will hear a click sound on top of the music at first. This is the beat of the song. Try your best to tap to the beat just like the click sound. Continue tapping until the music stops. Okay, so I don't know if you saw here, I made my console visible on the browser. And this has been very useful in programming to see what's going on in terms of events, and especially for this one, because here it's the only way to know that it's recording my responses properly. And since we have a lot of tapping responses that are very sensitive to reaction time, then yeah, this is basically the best way to know that everything's working. So even though you couldn't see me click, you could see there that the responses were recorded properly. So then here we put a loop function so you could practice endlessly until you feel you're ready. So I feel ready, so I'm gonna say no. I'll just run through another trial for the real trial and then we'll move on. But basically, let's try this for real. Once the song is finished, you'll be asked some questions and to move on to the next songs. Your progress in the study will be shown on the top of your screen. So yeah, there's also after each song, basically you're tapping for 20 seconds to a musical sample. And then there are some questions about whether you enjoy doing that and how difficult or challenging you thought it was, so that we can tell if all the musical stimuli are appropriate for the study. Okay, so let's do the one trial here. Okay, and then we get this screen here. So how hard was it to tap to this song? This was way too easy for me because it was very clear click. Did I like this song? Yeah, I usually like dance music, so I like this a lot. And then if I press continue, it would straight away start the next trial. Okay, and then again, so that's basically the flow of the study. There's about 70 of these, so I'm just gonna stop here. It lasts about half an hour. So now I'm gonna keep going a little bit on describing what we use here. So we're using a JDOS because it can produce a fairly intuitive URL link and records data, and the the status of testing and a lot of information that's very useful to monitor people's participation from a distance. And the Brams-Otp was important actually it's very important for this study because it helped us to make ethical amendments to our study fairly quickly, and it really reduces the amount of replay attacks that potential intruders could exploit on the server compared to traditional servers. So it made it much easier to apply for ethical amendments, and also I'm sure as well for scholarship applications at the moment. So that was the main reason why we're using the Brams-Otp for this. Now, regarding any sort of tips or challenges that I went through, when I started this, I only knew some basic HTML coding. So I started with fairly basic knowledge of how to program. And I found that the easiest thing to start with was to do just a JSPsych tutorial with a video. So the video that I really recommend to start with is this one here. I'll just show you the screen so you can recognize it. But yeah, I did different tutorial parts of this. It wasn't totally related to what I was doing, but just going through that and trying to get fluid with the language and how it functions was really helpful then to adapt each of the parts of the script to my needs. Now, what else do we do? So then first I started working on the JavaScript, using a JavaScript editor. So I used WebStorm, which works pretty well. And it's actually free if you have an educational account, which most people can have access to. And then and then after that, once the study was working, I integrated it into my local JDOS and then exported the study to the Brams-Otp JDOS so that I could send a link to people afterwards. When writing the script, it's actually a very long script. So I practiced each sort of articulation in the script in a separate script to be sure that it just worked independently. I found that really useful because it minimizes the amount of errors that you can accumulate. And when you're learning, you don't see all of them. So it was better to just, isolate each part, make sure that it works, that I understand what each line does. And then once I knew that that was working and I had some control over it, I would integrate it to the larger script and then keep building like that. At first, I didn't do that. I made one big script and I just got lost and lost a lot of motivation, felt a bit overwhelmed because of all the little mistakes that you can make when you start off and that you don't notice. So in terms of workflow, that was useful. Again, the browser console that I showed you is very useful to track errors. For the bilingual aspect, what we did is actually now, I can maybe now go into the script a little bit so you can see. So I'm going to switch my.
Kevin, in the interest of time, I'm going to suggest that you try to wrap up in the next couple minutes. But I think, I think the translation aspect is really potentially quite useful for people. So let's dip our toes into this. And I wrote some of the basic code that Kevin is using for the translation. So we can also return to this when we get to kind of general discussion at the end of this session.
Yeah, exactly. So basically here, this is the beginning of the function for language. It's fairly elaborate. I did not write this, so Nick wrote this part for sure. And it sort of ends here, so that's the function. And then the first screen that you see here in the timeline is to choose a language. So here you see that you have a choice between English and French, and that's going to appear as two different buttons. And then here, record your response. If the response for the English button is pressed, then it would be a 0. If it's a French button, it would be a 1. And then this then defines those responses as a specific string, English or French, that we will then recall each time. later on to make alternative versions of text. So for example, here now is my welcome screen, and the way that we integrate the language is in the prompt section. Then the way that it's programmed is we can just put an L here, and then if the person pressed English, this is the message that will be shown. If the person pressed French, this is the message that would be shown essentially. And then the same in choices. So I find that really useful because I didn't have to make two different scripts or two different URLs. Then what else was there? I mean, other things that were important in this was to preload the audio, because we have a lot of stimulus. And also, what else? Some conditional formatting as well, since the way that we would record the data was dependent on whether it was touchscreen or a keyboard. So that was another aspect that we had to look at as well. So if you have questions about conditional formatting with regards to that, this is an example here. So same thing, we made a similar function, and then, you know, if you chose keyboard, then we encoded it as a string here, and when we asked the question to return the function, is it keyboard or not? And these two brackets here offered two options. So if it was yes, we chose to record with the keyboard, then this is what would appear in French or English based on what they chose. And if they chose touchscreen, then this is what the instructions that would appear either in French or English. So that was the most complex thing, I think, to do with this, is to have those different levels of conditional formatting based on language and input type. So, I mean, yeah, that was basically in a nutshell how I experienced this whole adventure. And yeah, so if you have any questions now, feel free to ask.
Yeah, there are so few of us that I think if anyone has a question, then feel free to just shout it out loud, or you can type into the chat, whatever you prefer.
Yeah, or you can contact me or something.
Yeah, but we have time now if anyone has one or two questions before we move on to the next presentations.
Yeah, I had a quick question. Yeah, thanks for sharing, Kevin. I was just for like the practicalities of it, or actually, have you started kind of recruiting yet, or do you know where you're going to be kind of recruiting from and that kind of stuff?
Yeah, well, we haven't started participant recruitment yet. We're at the phase where the whole lab piloted the study.
Right.
So we did have some data, and right now I'm figuring out how to extract the data and then to convert it into a format that R can read and analyze. Right. But I would be starting next week. And the plan was to contact the same participants that came in earlier to pilot other aspects of the game we're doing. So we have already a small list, but then I think once that's working, we would probably advertise online through different platforms and social media with and then send individual links to each person, sort of one-time use individual links.
Okay. Okay, thanks.
Okay, well, if there are no further questions, I mean, feel free when we get to the end, if you think of a question later, we can jump back to it if there's time, but we can move on to Adam's presentation now, if you're ready, Adam.
Yep.
And thank you, Kevin. That was a very good and clear presentation of everything you've been working on.
Thanks. Pleasure.
So Kevin, you may need to stop sharing in order for Adam to start sharing.
Yeah, thank you.
So welcome, Adam, and the floor is yours.
Okay, I don't know what to share first, so I'll just start talking and it's gonna come. Well, my name is Robaczewski. I'm a PhD student in neuropsychology at UWM. My project is on the effects of music on inhibition capacity of adolescents with ADHD or not. What we're doing is that we're like reproducing a study that has been done in adults, but only with classical music, and we want to adapt the music to adolescents. So we want to include more types, more genre to ensure that adolescents find the music like attracting and stimulating. So what I've been doing for the summer, I looked for some music to present to the participants, and now what we want is for them to evaluate the musics and tell us if they think it's relaxing or stimulating, pleasant or not, and familiar or not. So I think I'm just gonna start with the questionnaire for now. I'm not completely done with my survey because well, I've been busy with other things. I'll just start with showing you what it looks like. So this is my test. So that's where I run like 100 times my things to make sure it's working. So at the beginning I had like just one component but it was a really long HTML file. So in the last Q&A, if you were there or if you listened to it, we said that sometimes with long experiments or when you have a lot of variables, it's better to have a lot of components because it's easier to analyze. So I don't think this applies to Kevin's experiment, but for mine, it's I think necessary. So I only have the consent form that's completed, so I can show you what it looks like. Yeah. So the challenge would be the aesthetic part. So since our questionnaire is for adolescents and we want as many people to respond to the questionnaire as possible, and it's kind of long, I think it's going to be like 45 minutes or more or less, and so we want it to be attractive and everything. So like doing it looks simple, but just putting the color, the blue color and the gray a rectangle around the text, it's pretty complicated. So there you have like the age. Since we have the participants under the age of 14, if you saw, I wrote 12 years old. So now I only have the consent form for 30 years old and less. If I wrote 14 years old or older, well, I would have the other consent form. It's a French survey. So that ends the consent form. But if I click here, it will play all the components. I can show you what it looks like, but there's no aesthetic. It's a bit of a mess, but I can just show you what the musical extracts look like. Okay, so as you can see, it's not finished yet. So here you have the instruction, and then you have the music. I don't know if you're gonna hear it. Just tell me. Can you hear it? No. Okay.
No.
No, but we hear your dog.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. You might hear my dog. Share computer sound. Okay. Sorry. You hear it? So that's what it looks like. So you have like 55 musical extracts. So the participants just check the corresponding box, well, circle, and it goes on for 55 musical extracts. So my first main challenge was that I initially completed my questionnaire on the Lime survey, but it did not work because for some reason we couldn't deactivate the security filter that allows us to put musical file or audio file in the questionnaire. So we had to switch platforms, and then well, the JDOS just came out, so we tried to do it on this platform. I am not an expert. I have never done any coding, programming. I had no idea how to do that. So I thought that I would show you the resources I found. It took a lot of research for me, a lot of work. So maybe it's gonna help you more than just looking for them yourself. So I think, well, Kevin talked about the YouTube video. Sorry. Well, I have the link to all the plugins you can use. So, for example, survey likert. So that's the little dots, and then multi-choice, multi-select, survey text when you want the participant to write a text. So maybe I could, well, I'll go around everyone. Then you have the CSS references. So all the codes, all the things you can do on CSS. So that's the aesthetic part. When you want to put a color, or you want the text aligned to the left or centered, or bigger, smaller, with paddings or not, well, that's where you find all the function. And then you have, sorry. And then you have the color picker that I personally like. So you can just select the color, and you have the number here. Finally, I think that's the bootstraps. So if you want, for example, to do a scrolling menu, well, you can find it here. So there's a lot of functions that you can find here. So I think I will just copy and paste the list of links in the chat, and maybe send it to Alex if you want them for yourselves, if you're not here right now. And then I wanted to show you what it looks like, the CSS file. So for the aesthetic part, I think it's here. Yeah, so this is the, like, when I had only one component, and then so that's just the consent form. So it's less overwhelming, and it's easier to follow. So this is the CSS file. You always have like a default CSS file with the, like in Kevin's experiment, you have the white background and the instructions and the text in the middle. So you can change that when you go in here. And I think my codes are these. So I wrote these that made the like the box, the white box, and the background of the blue background is here. So that's basically how you do the aesthetic. So that's what I wanted to show you, because I think if your experiment is like with adolescents, or you want people to complete the survey, like it's not like a just a task. So we ask a lot of questions, so we wanted it to be aesthetic. So I think that would be it for my part. I'm so sorry for my dog. So if you have any question, you can go.
So you took basically the built-in JSPsych CSS file, and then rather than linking to that one from your HTML page, you took your copy that you had modified. So some of the rules in the CSS file are just as they were in the original JSPsych version, and some of them you've customized.
Yeah, exactly. For example, you have the hover when you go. Just a second. I'll just when you go. I'll just run. There's so many things in my screen right now. So, for example, just the color of the continue. I just the continue is a default setting, but when you hover on it, well, it's always gray, I think, but I changed it to blue.
Okay.
It's
Nice.
a small detail, but you can just change the default setting in the CSS file and add your own changes.
In the Dolabella lab, we're also kind of beginning, having brought some tasks to kind of a functional level, we're beginning the journey as well, trying to make them look a bit nicer. And I know Lucille, who's in this meeting as well,
Yeah.
was kind of like pushing for that. One of the challenges that I found, I do have some background with HTML and CSS, so I kind of knew where to start. But one of the challenges is, particularly if you're mixing different plugin types in JS Psych, there may be certain screens or trials essentially where you want to specifically alter something there, but maybe you don't. When you create an aesthetic rule, it kind of attaches to an element in the page or a part of the page, depending on the ID or the class that part of the page has. And so you're basically working with the IDs and the classes that JS Psych just uses for the elements and that the plugins themselves use. And sometimes that gives you exactly kind of the specificity that you want, so that you're changing the background of, say, a particular kind of type of instruction screen while not changing the background of a response screen that you don't want to. But sometimes we didn't find it quite that convenient. So I don't have any tips to offer on that specifically, but just that's something to be aware of, I guess, when you're trying to do this. And one tip that I think is a really good way to kind of begin, you have your task that as you've kind of made it functional, and then there's certain things where you're like, well, I want to change that. I want to change that. In Chrome, if you right, and I think the same in Firefox, if you right click on a particular element, you can select inspect from the pop-up menu, and then that will kind of take you into the web developer pane. You saw part of that in Kevin's presentation showing the console output, but you can also go see, it'll show you the structure of the HTML tags, and you can also inspect what are the active CSS rules that are affecting the aesthetics of a particular element. And you can actually change it live there from the web developer bar to play around and get some ideas of what you might want to change in the actual CSS file before you go change it and then have to rerun the task to see if it did what you wanted it to. So there's a bit of a learning curve with figuring out how to navigate the web developer panel, but it's a really useful way of trying to figure out what you need to change in order to get it to look the way that you want it to.
Yeah, if I can just show you a YouTube channel that helped me. Like I watched almost all the videos to just because it's really good, I think. Well, because I'm a beginner. It's Learn Code Academy. So you have everything about. I think the first one is already on the Brams website. So it's the one with the mapping, or I don't know. Well, Alex he gave me this video, so I just searched for more. So I got all the HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and everything. So it was really helpful. So if you want to get started with your own experiment, I would suggest to look on this channel or any other resources.
Okay, great. Yeah, I think please feel free to email Alex with your list of suggested resources, and we can maybe send it out in an email to, well, I guess to everyone who's following these Q&A sessions, so that people can benefit from it.
Yeah, I'll send it to to Alex, and maybe he can put it on the Brams website or.
Yeah, sounds good. Okay, well, time is ticking along, so let's thank you, Adam, and let's
You're
move
welcome.
on to Andrea's presentation.
Hi everyone, thank you for having me. My name is Andrea, and I'm a graduate student at the Infant Research Lab at Concordia University under the supervision of Dr. Christopher Heinlein. So I'm gonna share my screen. Okay, so I'm gonna talk briefly about the experiment that we put up on the OTP. So this experiment, we're calling it for short lab name BP, and it's a phonetic boundaries online experiment. So the project overview is, we know that Bs and Ps have different phonological boundaries in different languages. And the phonological characteristics of different consonants change, and the voice onset time, or BOT, is one of the characteristics that can vary between languages. So voicing is the vibration in the vocal cords, and the onset of that vibration can vary on the position in which you pronounce a consonant. But for example, in English, B's and P's have a complete opposite voice onset time because they are pronounced in absolutely different positions in the vocal tract. But in French, those phonological boundaries are actually opposite. So the phonological boundary that a native English speaker hears as a B in French is actually a P, because it's pronounced in the actual opposite position. So what we were wondering is, what about bilinguals? Since they grow up hearing both languages, we were wondering where are their phonological boundaries, whether there are the same. If you hear more French than English, let's say, from birth, are your phonological boundaries going to be closer to French monolingual, and vice versa for when you hear more English than French? So those are all questions that we were trying to answer. So what we did was we modified the boundaries using the computer. So we recorded a native bilingual, French-English bilingual, saying some words that start with B and some that start with P. And then we modified the boundaries. So we started with the natural boundary for P, and then we modified it to the complete opposite, to sounding like the complete opposite, which would be B. And we also kept the values in between to see when people start perceiving the change between B's and P's. So that's a quick overview of the project. So as for designing the experiment, from the beginning, we decided to use the Open Sesame platform. So there are some reasons why we decided to use this, but I think one of the main reasons can be summarized in things that the other presenters said today. And I think we don't have a lot of experience with programming, and we're keen to learn. So I've only been on the lab for 1 year, and I'm learning R. So I've been learning R for 1 year, so I have experience on that language, but I still have a long way to go. And when we were starting this experiment, we didn't really have a lot of experience, the team of this project. So Open Sesame is really helpful for people who are just starting to dive into programming, because what Open Sesame does is that it has building blocks. I will show you a little bit later. So it has building blocks for your experiment. So the interface is really friendly, and it's a really great way to learn like the logic behind developing an experiment without actually having to code. So when you kind of choose the building blocks, OpenSesame kind of automatically generates the code. So another reason we chose this platform is because it's a free and open source platform. So in our lab, we're all the time striving for open science and reproducibility. So we thought it was great that this resource was kind of open science, and it also has the possibility of it's connected with the open science framework. So you can easily share your experimental design and stimuli on the OSF and go back and forth between the OSF and OpenSesame. So that's great. Yeah, so that was the reason we decided to use OpenSesame in the first place. And we were already with the experiment was already designed, and we had already started piloting on the lab when the pandemic struck. So after the pandemic struck, we were kind of like on a loss of how to go on, because we knew this experiment was easy to perform online, but we didn't really know how to go about putting it online. So by researching, we found out that actually OpenSesame also it's also friendly with Yatos. So by only exporting the OpenSesame experiment, you can import it directly to Yatos, and it runs fine on a Yatos local installation. So then we knew how we were gonna put it online. That was using Yatos. But then we didn't have like a server to actually store the data and generate like the URLs, and then that's when we found out about the Brams server. So it actually worked out well. So here I put the web page for the OpenSesame tutorial. So I'm going to show you real quick a little teaser of the experiment, which is already on the Brams platform, but it's not alive yet, but it's soon to be, like it's already running fine. So, okay, so this is our experiment, and in this case, for our experiment, we really did a counterbalance orders. So we had 4 counterbalance orders that we designed separately because they have the stimuli presented in different orders, and we really wanted to be very careful to have the same amount of participants in each order, and also we really need to track which participant gets which order. So this is the way we did it. We uploaded the 4 separate orders, and then what we're going to do is we're going to generate links for each of the orders, and we're going to have a research assistant tracking which participant gets which orders. So when we put the description of the study on the platform, the participants are going to get not the direct link to run the experiment, because we wanted to have just a little bit more control because of this reason. So they're going to see an email address, so they're going to email us if they want to participate, and then we will send them the URL of the particular order they are assigned to, and other questionnaires that we're also using, like language exposure questionnaires. So I'm just gonna run the experiment, but you will notice that the Open Science the OpenSesame is really easy for a person who doesn't really have a background in programming and who's learning to program, but it also strips you out of a little bit of flexibility. So you don't have a lot of, I mean, you do have the option to change the color of the background, but you have like limited options. You can't like, although you can modify the code that like it's generated, but like it strips you a little bit out of flexibility. So the design of the experiment is really very simple. but functional. Oh, so I'm gonna make sure that you can hear my computer, okay? So once you press the run experiment, it redirects you to the OS web that is from Open Sesame. So I'm just gonna click to begin, and then you get the experiment. So you get the instructions. So if possible, wear headphones, all the instructions. As you can see, the interface is really simple. It's not really designy, but functional. And we're gonna press a key to begin. Then the instructions for the experiment, which are you need to press in your keyboard S if it matches the letter on the left, and L when it matches the letter on the right. If you just read the letters S and L, it's not very intuitive, but if you look at your keyboards, S and L are actually on the left and the right, so that makes it kind of intuitive.
Puppy. Punny. Puppy. Pillow. Purred. Bird. Billow. Bunny. Book. Pen. Book. Pen.
And that was kind of the training phase. And then you're going to start to hear the words are kind of truncated. So those are the modified boundaries.
Pen. Bird. Book. Bill. Per. But. Book.
So that's kind of the gist of the experiment. And oops. Okay. So about advice and lessons learned. If you're a beginner and you really don't know much about building up an experiment or programming, I think the best advice I can give is just keep calm on Google. There are a lot of resources in Google. There are a lot of forums where people ask and answer questions. Just also another advice would be to read and do the tutorials to be able to customize your experiment as much as you can. I did had an issue exporting from the OS web, and I think that is one of the disadvantages of not writing your own code is that like the OS is pretty good at generating the code. Like it usually worked, and when I exported it, it worked immediately on my local Yatos server, but it exported a line of code that has a particular directory that's made for servers that are using more than one Java component. And this was not the case for Brams. So at the beginning, it didn't really run on Brams, but yeah, so the Brams team is really amazing. Like I was emailing with Alex, and we kind of troubleshoot, and we found that line on the code. We just changed that, and now it's running beautifully, as you can see. And well, as usual, just try to keep the instructions simple. And I'm gonna super quickly show you the tutorial. So as you can see, it also the Open Sesame also connects with other physiological measures like iLink, which is also great. And you can see a little bit here the user interface. So as you can see, you have all the blocks for constructing your experiment. So you can add loops, you can add sound, you can kind of change the background, and in the end, your experiment gets constructed like this. So you have like text, your instructions, then a practice loop, then you add blocks. So it's really very intuitive, and I think it's, if you have never done experiments and it's kind of a steep learning curve to go just from nothing to like HTML and other like more complex programming languages. So I think this is a good way to like build up your mind on how the process of building an experiment works. And you can like learn also and review the code for each block, and then you can learn on the way, but still design your experiment and, I don't know, maybe graduate or have your thesis done in time without having to take off a lot of time learning. So you can pretty much like learn on the way. So yeah, that's pretty much it.
Thanks, Andrea. That was great. I have a because I'm aware of Open Sesame, but not really. I haven't used it. The problem that you mentioned that kind of prevented it from working just from the first export when you put it on the Brams-Otp server. The fix that you had to make, I guess that's something that you would have to do every time you export a new version before putting it on the OTP.
Yeah, before putting it on the OTP, yeah, that is correct. Yeah, maybe we can kind of like put up a screenshot or something on the OTP with the line of code so people can find it really quickly. It is particularly in the OTP because it doesn't have that like multiple Java directories. So it's just a question of changing that line of code in like 5 minutes, and then it's done.
Okay. And you also mentioned like that, well, the strength of Open Sesame is that you can build your experiment without having to go in and do a lot of manual coding. But that you can customize things like if you are ready to dive into the code and customize it. At that point, do you kind of lose the ability to edit it further using the kind of main Open Sesame configuration, or can you have some customizations and still be able to do work in the normal builder for?
Oh no, yeah, you can still work on the builder, because like every time you build something on the Open Sesame, you kind of have like in the bottom of your screen, you kind of have the code. So you kind of like maybe drag the block and you put it there, and then it like automatically pops the whole code. And if you want to, you can review the code and maybe change some settings on the code, and then go to the next block and do the same. So it doesn't really affect.
Okay, great. Well, that seems like a really great option. And I think like you made a really good point about how, particularly as a first step to get your head around like just how to think about building an experiment, having done that, I guess, once in Open Sesame, that once you do feel ready to and you need to maybe do something that you can't do just from scratch in Open Sesame, like you'll already be that much kind of further along in your understanding to be able to put it together with JavaScript and so on. So that's a really great option for people. Does anyone else have any other questions for Andrea or for any of the presenters? Or any kind of general questions or I guess comments related to our collective effort to build new tasks and get them running on the OTP?
I just had a question for Adam. I was wondering how complicated was it actually to create a container with, the background, to have like a border surrounding the questions or instructions?
Yeah, well, at the beginning, it was kind of complicated because I had no idea how to do that. I knew what I wanted to do, but I had no idea how. So I checked videos, I checked the codes and everything, but actually it's quite simple when you know how. Like it's not only in CSS, you have to have a good organization in your HTML file. So
But,
with yeah.
Because I researched like on the website you sent, I was actually on them, and there's quite a few that actually says you cannot change the color of the margin. So how did you manage that?
Oh, that's on the page itself. That's on the full body. I would guess that's a rule on the body.
Yeah, I did that. Like right now, the whole page is just blue, but I don't
Yeah.
want the middle part to be blue. That's why.
I don't know by heart, but let me just check. I think.
If you think of it in terms of layers, like you have the body, which is kind of just the background of the
Yeah.
page before any elements. So you set that to what you want it to be kind of outside any particular box. And then for a box that you want to have a different background, you just give it its own background, like whether it's a div or a p or whatever kind
Yeah,
of
exactly.
element
That's
it is.
exactly
You give
what
it
I
its own
did.
background. You can give it a border if you want a border.
Oh,
That's what
do
I
I
did.
have to do that for each page, or is there a way to make it adapt to the size of the text on each page?
I mean, it depends. Like as I mentioned before, like what the rules apply to is kind of like you say for this particular ID or for this particular class. So if you're using a certain plugin across multiple screens or trials or whatever, then it will probably create an element like a div that has the same kind of default class. And so you can try setting a rule that targets that class, and then every time that type of trial is creating the content on the screen, like for a particular JSX plugin, then it should use the rule that you that you kind of targeted with in your CSS. You know, like the challenge is just getting that right, but that's in principle it should be that easy. But like I said before, like if those classes don't perfectly correspond to which things you want to modify and which things you don't, then we kind of need to look into either putting a div inside the content of a trial and giving that our own class name, and then we can just target that with the CSS rule, or maybe customizing a plugin if we really have to go to that extreme.
Okay.
If you want, I can show you like just summarily. Okay. For example, here you have this is the consent form. So you have the title of the consent. So it's H2, and in my HTML file, H2 is centered and color black.
Okay.
So then I have H3, which is a smaller text. I have an instruction. So I ask the participant to get his parent or legal tutor, and then another H3. And then I have a class cons for consent.
Mm-hmm.
So here the dot says go get the class cons. And here I have the text align left, a border, so that's the border. And the class ends like at the end, I guess.
Yeah, there's your closing div tag right at the end. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, the div, yeah. So here, as you can see, div and the div here. Okay, so that ends the class. So what I asked here is that everything that's in class has a border. But if you want to have like in the text, like everything is just one color and white, I had trouble because by default you have some paddings and margins. So what I had to do was when you see P, OL, or UL, I want these things to apply. So I want the text to be left. I want the background white, no margin, no padding. If you have margin or padding, you will have like a blue space between all of your paragraphs, but I didn't want that. So that's how I got it to look like this. Well, with an H. So that's what I mean. So this in the border, it's everything that's the class.
Oh,
but
by the way, we're seeing your editor right now. We're not seeing your browser.
Sorry. Yeah, I'm not used to presenting on Zoom. Okay, so here. So that's how I got. So from here to the end of the text, that's the class.
That's your div that you've given the custom
class. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, that I wanted to have a border. Because if you just for example, if you had applied that function to P, well, every paragraph would have its own borders, but I didn't want that.
Oh, okay, I get it.
Do
Yeah.
you get what I?
Yeah.
So that's why I said that it's important to have a good organization in the in your HTML file. So that's why here, like, I have the H2, the H3 div class, P, UL, LI. I think I have an OL somewhere, yeah, here. So that's, and I'm not even an expert. And when I watched the videos, there were like a lot of classes. But I think this is the first time that I achieved like, it's the first time I made a class. I just tried it and it worked. But before it didn't work. I don't know. I have no idea why, but this one worked.
And I think it's easier to, like, when you have a situation like this where it makes sense for you to create your own class rather than trying to modify an existing one. There's a simplicity because you're not doing battle with any default. Well, I guess, if it's a p tag, then it's going to inherit whatever margin a p tag has by default, unless you reset it like you did. But by making your own class, like, it's a little bit easier to think about, okay, well, these are just the specific aesthetics that I want on this. I can see I've got a div that has that class in my code. Yeah, that can be a pretty straightforward way.
And that's why, well, here I have P, UL, and everything. So it's going to apply to all the paragraphs in all the questionnaires. So if I continue, that's why here I have the white padding. I don't mind it. I think it's okay. But like, I'm no expert, so I don't really. I'm just trying some things out. So yeah, that's pretty much how I did it. If you have some trouble, you can write to me, and I could, like, send you the codes or something.
Thank you very much, Adam.
No problem.
That was
Thank you, Adam.
really helpful.
Any other questions or discussion points? I just wanted to mention, so Kevin gave a glimpse into the kind of multilingual task effort that we've been doing, and I'm quite happy to share that code. It's only been through a couple iterations, but it seems to be working quite well. And the goal with it really was to add as little bulk as possible to your actual code, so that you can just, like, where you would write one string in one language, now you can write two, and it will just automatically show the one that has been selected. So if that's, and that then means that you don't have to have, say, two versions of each of your HTML files or task files, that you then, if you're changing anything structurally or logically in one, you have to remember to go change it in the other. You can have a single file and then just have the text adapt to the selected language. So if that sounds like something that would be useful for your tasks, please feel free to contact me. I'm happy to share the code. I have a feeling that probably a number of studies might benefit from this. So I'm happy to share it. Okay, well, we're a little over an hour. And so I think if there isn't anything else, just thanks to Kevin, Adam, and Andrea. Great presentations, good discussion. I suppose the 4th edition of the Q&A will be in some number of weeks. Probably Alex will be back. But thank you all for joining today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.